The studio lights burned bright, casting a warm glow over the set of The Kelly Clarkson Show. The audience buzzed with anticipation, their energy palpable as Kelly Clarkson, all smiles and Texas charm, leaned forward in her chair. Her guest, Tim McGraw, settling into the country music legend, dressed in a tailored black blazer and his signature cowboy hat, exuded a quiet confidence. His latest album had just dropped, and the interview was meant to be a celebratory moment, a chance to talk music, life, and the road ahead. But beneath the surface, something simmered, a tension nobody in the room could quite pin down. Kelly, ever the natural conversationalist, kicked things off with her usual warmth. "Tim, it's so good to have you here," she said, her voice carrying that infectious enthusiasm that made her show a hit. "This new album, it's raw, it's real, it's got folks talking. What's the story behind it?" The crowd cheered, and Tim offered a small smile, tipping his hat slightly. He spoke about the inspiration, the late-night writing sessions, the way the songs poured out of him after years on the road. But his answers were clipped, his tone measured, like he was holding something back. The audience didn't notice at first. They were too caught up in Kelly's easy banter, her ability to make every guest feel like an old friend. She prodded, gently, asking about his collaboration with younger artists, how he felt about the evolving country music scene. Tim's responses grew sharper, his words laced with an edge that made Kelly's smile falter. "Just for a second. I'm not here to chase trends," he said, his voice low but firm. "I make music for people who get it, not for the ones scrolling their phones looking for the next viral hit." The audience laughed, thinking it was a playful jab, but Kelly's eyes narrowed slightly. She sensed something was off. She pivoted, keeping the mood light, or trying to. "Okay, but you've got to admit, some of these new artists are shaking things up. Like that duet you did, it's blowing up online. Fans are eating it up." Tim shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, well, fans eat up a lot of things," he said, his tone carrying a bite that didn't match the room's energy. The crowd's laughter faded into an awkward murmur. Kelly, quick on her feet, tried to steer back to safer ground, asking about his tour plans, but Tim cut her off. "Look, Kelly, I'm not here to talk about what's trending on some app. I'm here to talk about the music. Can we do that?" The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Kelly's smile didn't waver, but her eyes did. She nodded, leaning back in her chair, and said, "All right, let's talk music then. Tell me about the heart of this album." But the air had shifted, and everyone felt it. The silence in the studio hung heavy, the audience caught between anticipation and unease. Kelly Clarkson, ever the professional, leaned forward, her voice steady but softer now, as if trying to coax Tim McGraw back into the rhythm of the interview. "All right, Tim, let's dive into the heart of this album," she said, her Texas drawl wrapping around the words like a lifeline. "You've said it's your most personal work yet. What makes it so special to you?" The question was open, inviting, meant to give Tim the floor to share something real, but his posture had stiffened, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair, knuckles pale against the dark fabric. Tim's eyes flicked to the audience, then back to Kelly, and for a moment, it seemed like he might soften. "This album," he started, his voice low, almost gravelly, "it's about the things that matter, family, struggle, the stuff that keeps you up at night, not the noise out there." He gestured vaguely toward the audience, or maybe the world beyond the studio walls. The crowd nodded, some clapping softly, but the energy was off, like they were waiting for a punchline that wasn't coming. Kelly seized the moment, trying to build on his words. "I hear that," she said, nodding. "Your songs have always had that soul, that connection to real life. Is there a track on this album that's especially close to you?" Tim's jaw worked, like he was chewing on something bitter. "They're all close," he said, his tone flat. "But I don't think people get it. They're too busy chasing clicks, chasing drama. They don't listen to the music, they just want a story to sell." The words landed like a challenge, and Kelly's brow furrowed slightly. She was used to handling tough guests, but this felt different, personal. "Well, we're listening now," she said, her voice firm but warm, trying to bridge the gap. "Tell us about one of those songs. Take us inside it." He leaned back, crossing his arms, and let out a short, humorless laugh. "You want me to spill my guts for the cameras? For the headlines? That's not how this works, Kelly." The audience shifted uncomfortably, a few whispers rippling through the crowd. Kelly's smile tightened, but she didn't back down. "I'm not asking for headlines, Tim, I'm asking for you. Your fans want to know what drives you, what makes this album different." Her words were sincere, but they seemed to hit a nerve. Tim's eyes darkened, and he shook his head. "You think it's about the fans? Half of them don't even buy records anymore. They just want a clip to share, something to make them feel like they know me." The studio felt smaller now, the air thick with tension. Kelly's producer, standing off stage, gave a subtle signal to wrap things up, but Kelly wasn't ready to let it go. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a quieter register. "I get it, Tim. The industry's changed, and it's tough, but you're still out here, making music that matters. Why not share that with us? Why not let us in? It was a genuine plea, but Tim's expression hardened. He uncrossed his arms, leaning forward, his voice cutting through the room. Because some things aren't for sale, Kelly. Not everything's a performance. The words hung there, sharp and final, and for the first time, the audience seemed to realize this wasn't just an interview gone off script. Something deeper was unraveling. The studio lights seemed to dim, though they hadn't changed, as Tim McGraw's words settled over the room like a cold front. Kelly Clarkson sat back in her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face a careful mask of composure. She'd handled tough moments on air before, but this was different. Tim's words weren't just sharp, they were personal, and they cut deeper than the usual talk show banter. The audience, sensing the shift, sat frozen, their earlier enthusiasm replaced by a collective unease. Off stage, the producer's hand hovered over the signal for a commercial break. But Kelly's eyes flicked toward him, a subtle shake of her head. She wasn't ready to cut and run. Tim, she said, her voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity. I hear you. Not everything's a performance. But you're here, on this stage, because you've got something to share. So let's talk about that. What's one thing you want people to take away from this album? It was a lifeline, a chance for Tim to pull back from the edge, to find common ground. But he wasn't taking it. He leaned back, his cowboy hat casting a shadow over his eyes, and let out a slow breath. Like he was weighing whether to keep going or shut it all down. You know what I want people to take away? He said finally, his voice low but carrying a weight that filled the room. I want them to stop turning everything into a circus. Music used to mean something. It used to be about the story, the feeling. Now it's just content, just another post to scroll past. I'm tired of it, Kelly. I'm tired of playing the game. The audience stirred, a few murmurs breaking the silence, but no one clapped. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was raw, unfiltered, and uncomfortably real. Kelly nodded, her expression softening. But there was a spark in her eyes, a hint of defiance. I get that, she said. The industry can feel like a machine sometimes, chewing up what's real and spitting out noise. But you're still making music, Tim. You're still out here, pouring your heart into it. That's not playing the game, that's fighting it. Her words were earnest, a bridge built from her own experience. But Tim's face didn't change. He looked at her, then at the audience, and for a moment, it seemed like he might say something to ease the tension. But instead, he shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. Fighting it, he said, his voice rising just enough to carry an edge. You think this is fighting it? Sitting here, under these lights, answering the same questions, smiling. For the cameras, this is the game, Kelly, and you're good at it, better than most. The words hit like a slap, and the audience gasped, a low ripple of shock moving through the crowd. Kelly's smile vanished, her eyes locking onto Tim's. For the first time, she didn't have a quick comeback, no easy laugh to smooth things over. The producer signaled again, more urgently, but Kelly ignored him, leaning forward, her voice calm but firm. That's not fair, Tim, she said. I'm here because I love music, same as you. I'm not your enemy. The room was silent. Now, the kind of silence that makes every rustle, every cough, feel like an intrusion. Tim stared at her, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, it seemed like he might back down. But then he stood, abruptly, his chair scraping against the stage floor, the sound sharp in the quiet. Maybe not, he said, his voice low, but I'm done with this. He turned, his boots heavy on the polished floor, and walked off the set, leaving the audience stunned and Kelly alone under the lights. The echo of Tim McGraw's boots faded as he disappeared behind the stage curtain, leaving a void that swallowed the studio. The audience sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between the empty chair and Kelly Clarkson, who remained motionless. Under the glaring lights, her face, usually so animated, was a study in restraint, her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands still clasped tightly in her lap. The producer, now frantic, signaled for a commercial break, and the stage manager's voice crackled through the crew's headsets, urging action. But Kelly didn't move, didn't speak, not yet. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air, thick and unresolved. Finally, she took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling, and turned to the audience with a small, tight smile. Well, folks, she said, her voice steady, but quieter than usual. That was unexpected. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, but most sat silent, unsure how to react. Kelly leaned forward, her hands unclasping, fingers tapping lightly on her knee. You know, this show is about real conversations, real moments. Sometimes, those moments get messy, and that's okay. Her words were measured, but there was a tremor beneath them, a hint of the effort it took to keep the show on track. Offstage, the crew scrambled. The producer was on the phone, likely with Tim's team, trying to figure out what had just detonated on live television. Whispers circulated among the stagehands. Tim had been tense all morning, barely speaking during the pre-show prep, his usual warmth replaced by a distant edge. Something had been brewing, but no one had expected this. In the control room, the director replayed the last few minutes. Searching for the exact moment things went south, while social media was already lighting up with clips of the exchange, hashtags sprouting like weeds. Kelly, unaware of the online storm, pushed forward. "Let's take a quick break," she said, her smile widening just enough to reassure the audience. "When we come back, we've got more to talk about, and I promise, it's gonna be good." The applause was hesitant, but it came, and the show cut to commercial. The moment the cameras stopped rolling, Kelly's shoulders slumped, and she pressed a hand to her forehead, exhaling sharply. Her assistant hurried over, offering a water bottle, but Kelly waved it away, her eyes fixed on the spot where Tim had vanished. Backstage, Tim hadn't gone far. He stood in a dimly lit hallway, his hat pulled low, hands shoved deep into his pockets. His manager, a wiry man with a clipboard and a perpetual frown, was already at his side, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "Tim, we need to get ahead of this. People are gonna talk. We can spin it. Say you weren't feeling well. Something." Tim didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the floor, his jaw tight. The manager pressed on. "You walk off like that. It's a story. You know how this works." Tim's head snapped up, his eyes sharp. "Let it be a story," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm not apologizing for saying what I feel." The manager sighed, rubbing his temples, but before he could argue, a stagehand approached, hesitant. "Mr. McGrath, Kelly's team is asking if you'll come back out. They're willing to rework the segment, keep it focused on the music." Tim's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a mix of regret and defiance. He shook his head, slow but deliberate. "I'm done here," he said, and turned toward the exit, his boots echoing again, this time with a finality that left no room for negotiation. The stagehand watched him go, then hurried back to the set where Kelly was preparing to face the cameras again, alone. The studio hummed with a restless energy as the commercial break ended, the audience settling back into their seats, their whispers barely hushed. Kelly Clarkson stood center stage, the lights catching the glint of determination in her eyes. She'd had moments to regroup, to shake off the sting of Tim McGraw's exit, and now she faced the cameras with a renewed resolve. The producer had urged her to move on, to pivot to the next segment, but Kelly wasn't one to gloss over a raw moment. She knew the audience, both in the room and watching at home, deserved something real. "All right, y'all," she said, her voice carrying that familiar warmth, though it was tempered now, more grounded. "We had a bit of a curveball just now, didn't we?" The audience chuckled softly, a release of tension, and Kelly's smile felt genuine, if a little worn. Tim's got a lot on his mind, and sometimes, that's how it goes. This show's about honesty, about showing up as you are. So let's keep that going. She sat down, crossing her legs, and leaned into the moment. "Let's talk about music, about what it means to pour your soul into something and put it out there for the world." The audience leaned in, captivated by her ability to turn chaos into connection. Kelly spoke about her own journey, the highs and lows of the industry, the pressure to stay relevant in a world obsessed with the next big thing. She didn't mention Tim directly, but his shadow loomed, his words about the circus of fame echoing in her own. "You put your heart out there," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "And sometimes it's messy. Sometimes, it's not what people expect, but that's what makes it worth doing." The crowd erupted in applause, louder now, rallying behind her. Backstage, the mood was less forgiving. Tim's manager paced the green room, phone pressed to his ear, fielding calls from publicists and media outlets already sniffing out the story. The clips were spreading online, dissected frame by frame, with headlines screaming about a feud and a meltdown. The manager muttered under his breath, frustrated by Tim's refusal to play damage control. Outside, Tim had reached the parking lot, the cool air hitting his face as he climbed into his black SUV. He sat there for a moment, staring at the dashboard, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The weight of what he'd done was settling in, not regret exactly, but a heavy awareness of the fallout to come. Inside, Kelly wrapped up the segment, her voice steady as she introduced the next guest, a rising pop artist who bounded onto the stage with all the enthusiasm Tim had lacked. The contrast was stark, and the audience embraced it, clapping with renewed energy. But Kelly's mind was still on that empty chair, on the words Tim had flung at her. As the cameras panned away, she caught the eye of her producer, who gave her a nod of respect. She'd held the show together, turned a disaster into something human, but it had cost her something, too. Meanwhile, Tim's SUV pulled out of the lot, the city blurring past as he drove in silence. His phone buzzed relentlessly in his pocket, but he ignored it. He thought about the album, the one he'd poured everything into, the one he'd come to talk about before it all unraveled. He thought about Kelly, about the hurt in her eyes when he'd called her out. It wasn't personal, not really, but it had felt like it in the moment. The industry, the expectations, the endless demand to perform it had all boiled over, and she'd been caught in the crossfire. As the studio faded, in his rear view, Tim wondered if he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The city lights streaked past Tim McGraw's SUV, the hum of the engine a low counterpoint to the storm in his mind. He hadn't turned on the radio, hadn't checked his phone, which still buzzed with notifications he had no intention of reading. The weight of the day pressed against him, not just the walk-off, but everything it represented: years of navigating an industry that demanded more than he wanted to give. He thought about Kelly Clarkson, her face when he'd thrown those sharp words her way, and a pang of something close to guilt tugged at him, but he didn't turn back. Not yet. Back at the studio, Kelly powered through the rest of the show, her charisma carrying her through the final segments. The pop artist who followed Tim was a burst of energy, filling the room with light banter and a performance that had the audience on their feet. Kelly matched their enthusiasm, laughing, singing along, but those closest to her could see at the faint strain in her eyes, the way her hands fidgeted when the cameras cut away. As the show wrapped, she thanked the audience with her usual warmth. But the moment the stage lights dimmed, she slipped backstage, her smile fading. Her assistant handed her a phone, already open to the flood of online reactions. Kelly scanned the comments, the speculation, the clips replaying Tim's exit. She set the phone down, shaking her head. "Let's not do this now," she said softly, and headed for her dressing room. The internet, predictably, was ablaze. Fans and detractors alike dissected every word, every glance, spinning narratives of a bitter feud or a publicity stunt gone wrong. Some praised him for his raw honesty. Others called it a tantrum. Kelly's supporters rallied, lauding her for handling the moment with grace, while others questioned if she'd pushed too hard. The truth, as always, was messier than the headlines. In her dressing room, Kelly sat in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She wasn't angry, not really, just tired. Tired of the tightrope walk between authenticity and performance. The same tightrope Tim had railed against. She understood him, more than she wanted to admit. But miles away, Tim pulled into a quiet diner, the kind of place he used to haunt early in his career, before fame turned every move into a spectacle. He slid into a booth, hat pulled low, and ordered a coffee, black. The waitress, oblivious to who he was, moved on to the next table, and for the first time all day, Tim felt like he could breathe. He thought about the album, the songs he'd written in stolen moments, the stories he'd wanted to tell on Kelly's show. Instead, he'd let the frustration take over, let it spill out in a way that didn't fix anything. He wasn't proud of it, but he wasn't sorry either. The coffee arrived, steaming, and he wrapped his hands around the mug, staring into the dark liquid like it held answers. By the time Kelly left the studio, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the lot. Her team had drafted a statement, something neutral about respecting Tim's perspective and looking forward to future conversations. But she hadn't signed off on it. She climbed into her car, the quiet enveloping her, and for a moment, she considered calling Tim. Not for the cameras, not for the narrative, but to talk, one artist to another. She didn't though. Some things needed space, time to settle. As she drove home, she turned on the radio, and one of Tim's new songs came on, its raw chords filling the car. She listened, really listened, and for the first time all day, she smiled just a little. Tim, still at the diner, pulled out his phone, the screen a mess of missed calls and texts. One message caught his eye, from an old friend in the industry. "You said what a lot of us feel, just hope it was worth it." He set the phone down, staring out the window at the fading light. Worth it, he didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he'd said something true. Even if it cost him, the road ahead would be messy. But then again, so was the music. And that was the point. Moved on to the next table. And for the first time all day, Tim felt like he could breathe. He thought about the album, the songs he'd written in stolen moments, the stories he'd wanted to tell on Kelly's show. Instead, he'd let the frustration take over, let it spill out in a way that didn't fix anything. He wasn't proud of it, but he wasn't sorry either. The coffee arrived, steaming, and he wrapped his hands around the mug, staring into the dark liquid like it held answers. By the time Kelly left the studio, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the lot. Her team had drafted a statement, something neutral about respecting Tim's perspective and looking forward to future conversations. But she hadn't signed off on it. She climbed into her car, the quiet enveloping her, and for a moment, she considered calling Tim. Not for the cameras, not for the narrative, but to talk, one artist to another. She didn't though. Some things needed space, time to settle. As she drove home, she turned on the radio, and one of Tim's new songs came on, its raw chords filling the car. She listened, really listened, and for the first time all day, she smiled just a little. Tim, still at the diner, pulled out his phone, the screen a mess of missed calls and texts. One message caught his eye, from an old friend.